You are nothing! Do you hear me? Nothing! The words tore through the marble halls of a mansion where nothing was ever supposed to be heard. A woman in a silk robe stood over a young mother, kneeling on a polished floor. And in the corner, forgotten, a 4-year-old girl clutched a worn stuffed rabbit and watched everything her mother was trying so hard to hide. The woman thought the cameras were off. She thought the house was empty. She thought a single mother who scrubbed floors for a living would never dare to speak. But she forgot one thing. A 4-year-old does not know how to lie. A 4-year-old does not weigh consequences, or fear who might lose their temper, or calculate what the truth might cost. A child simply points one small finger and says exactly what she saw. And what this little girl saw was about to bring down a fortune, an engagement, and a lie that had been dressed up in diamonds for 2 long years. Welcome back, friends, to another true-to-life story. Settle in, pour yourself something warm, and stay with me, because this one will stay with you long after the screen goes dark. Before we begin, do me a small favor and tell me in the comments which state or which country you are watching from tonight. It always means the world to know who is out there listening. Now, let me take you to a quiet hillside on the edge of the city, to a house made of stone and glass, where a man had everything money could buy, and almost lost the one thing money never could: the truth. His name was Ethan Cole. He was 36 years old, and by every measure the world uses to keep score, he had won. He had built a company from nothing, a small idea, sketched on the back of a napkin in a college cafeteria, that had grown into a name people recognized across the country. He drove past his own name on the side of a building most mornings, and still, some part of him could not quite believe it belonged to him. Because Ethan had not been born into any of it. He had grown up in a narrow rented house with thin walls, where his mother worked 2 jobs and still found the time to sit with him at the kitchen table every single night and ask about his day. She had passed away 3 years before this story begins, but she lived on in him in 100 quiet ways. She had taught him that a man is not measured by what he owns, but by how he treats the people who can do nothing for him in return. That lesson was the reason a young mother named Hana had a job at all. Hana was 27. She had come to Ethan's household a little over a year ago, answering a listing for a housekeeper, sitting nervously in his study with her hands folded tightly in her lap. She had a 4-year-old daughter, Mia, and no one to leave her with in the early mornings. Most employers had already shown her the door for that very reason. Ethan had not. "Bring her," he had said, that first week, when he found the little girl asleep in a stroller by the pantry at 6 in the morning. "A child shouldn't be alone at that hour. Bring her with you. There's plenty of room." Hana had nearly cried right there in the kitchen. She did not, because she had learned long ago that tears were a luxury a single mother could rarely afford. But she remembered his kindness, and she repaid it the only way she knew how: by working harder than anyone in that house, by leaving every floor gleaming and every task done before it was asked. She arrived every morning at 6, long before the sun crested the hills. She wore the same pressed uniform, carried the same worn canvas bag, and pushed little Mia along in her stroller, because the daycare down the road did not open its doors until 8. Mia would sit with her coloring books and her stuffed rabbit, quiet as a mouse, while her mother moved through the great rooms of a house that was not hers. Ethan grew fond of the girl. He slipped her small toys. He let her spin in his office chair while he worked. He called her little boss, and she called him nothing at all at first, just watched him with enormous brown eyes, and then, one afternoon, ran to him with her arms up, and the name did not matter anymore. For a while, in that big stone house on the hill, life was as close to gentle as Hana had known in years. And then Ethan fell in love, or believed he had. Her name was Camille Wren. She was 30, and she was, by any honest account, beautiful. The kind of beauty that photographs well and arrives in a room a half-second before she does. Ethan had met her 2 years earlier at a charity gala, across a crowded ballroom, and he had felt, for the first time since his mother's passing, that the world had handed him something good. Camille had grown up with everything Ethan had spent his life earning: private schools, a trust she rarely bothered to touch, a last name that opened doors in 3 cities. When she looked at Ethan Cole, She saw a handsome, self-made man with a warm heart, and that warmth was, to her, the most useful thing about him. Because a warm heart is a trusting heart, and a trusting heart does not check the books too closely. To the world, Camille was radiant. She volunteered at the children's hospital when the photographers were there. She posed with rescued kittens for the society pages. She laughed at the right jokes and touched the right arms and remembered the names of everyone who mattered. But a house is a private place, and the moment the front gate closed and the staff arrived for the day, a different woman stepped out from behind the smile. It began with small things. It always does. "You missed a spot," Camille said one morning, standing over Hana in the front hall, her voice flat and cool. "Do it again." Hana did not argue. She had never learned how. "Yes, ma'am," she said quietly, and dipped her cloth back into the bucket, and began again on a floor that had already been clean. Mia sat nearby in her stroller, holding her rabbit, watching. She did not understand the words, but children understand temperature. They feel the cold come into a room the way a farmer feels weather in his knees, and the little girl felt the cold rolling off the woman in the silk robe, and she pulled her rabbit a little closer. The cruelty was careful. That was the thing about it. Camille never raised her voice when Ethan was home. She never said the sharp things where he could hear. She added chores at the last minute and canceled lunch breaks and found fault with work that had no fault in it. And she did all of it in the narrow hours when the master of the house was away at the office, believing his home was a place of peace. Hana needed the work. That is the plain and painful truth at the center of so many of these stories. Her mother, back in her hometown, was ill and needed help with the cost of her medicine. Her little girl had asthma, and asthma means doctors, and doctors mean insurance, and insurance meant this job. Her husband had left 2 years before and taken his help with him. There was no one else. There was only Hana, and the early mornings, and the paycheck that stood between her daughter and the street. So she swallowed her pride, day after day, the way you swallow a stone. She told herself it was temporary. She told herself Mia deserved a better life, and this paycheck was the bridge that would carry them there. She told herself the wedding was 2 months away, and that afterward, surely, the woman would soften. She was wrong about that, but she could not have known it yet. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Hana learned what Camille truly thought of her. She was in the pantry, quietly restocking the shelves, when Camille came into the next room with a phone pressed to her ear, believing herself alone. Hana froze between the canned goods, not out of nosiness, but out of the instinct every person in service learns eventually, the instinct to become invisible, to hold still until the storm passes. And so she heard it, every word. "Oh, Ethan is hopeless," Camille was saying, and there was a laugh in her voice, light and easy, the laugh of a woman sharing a private joke. "He thinks I'm some kind of saint. Honestly, it's almost too easy. Once the ring's on and the papers are signed, I'll have access to everything he's built." A pause, a murmur from the other end. "The staff, please. The girl who cleans the floors?" Another laugh, softer now and colder. "She's furniture. You don't worry about what the furniture hears." The cans in Hana's hands trembled. She set them down carefully so they would not clink. She had heard cruel things before, in other houses, from other people, but there was something about that one word, furniture, that lodged itself in her chest and would not come loose. To be worked hard was one thing. To be looked at every day and seen as an object, a thing, a piece of the room, that was something else. That was a wound with no bandage for it. That night, in the small one-bedroom apartment she shared with Mia, Hana sat on the edge of the bed after her daughter had fallen asleep and thought, as she thought nearly every night, about walking away. But walking away meant no paycheck. It meant no medicine for a little girl who sometimes woke in the night struggling to breathe. It meant a notice on the door within 30 days. And so, as she had 100 nights before, she folded the thought up and put it away, and told herself, just a little longer. Some evenings, when the long day was done, Ethan would come home before Hana had finished gathering her things, and those were the good moments, the ones that made the rest of it bearable. He came into the kitchen one such evening, loosening his tie after a day of meetings, and Mia lit up like a lamp and lifted both arms. He scooped her up without a thought. "Well, if it isn't the little boss," he said. "How was your day?" Mia giggled, and then, in the way small children do, without any idea of the weight of it, she reached out and patted her mother's wrist, a wrist Hana had kept tucked carefully inside her sleeve all afternoon. "Mommy has an owie," Mia said simply. "Right there." Ethan's smile paused. He looked at Hana. "Everything all right?" Hana pulled her sleeve down and put on the smile she had worn so many times it fit her like her uniform. "Just clumsy, Mr. Cole. I caught it on the cart. It's nothing." He looked at her a moment longer than the answer needed. Something in him, some instinct sharpened by a childhood spent reading his own mother's tired face, told him not to believe her. But he had a board call in 20 minutes and a fiancé waiting upstairs, and the moment slipped past him the way important moments so often do. He let it go. But the little girl's words had done their quiet work. A seed had been planted. And seeds, even the smallest ones, have a way of putting down roots that no one sees until the day they break the surface. That night, as Hana carried her sleeping daughter home through the cooling dark, she had no idea how soon that seed would grow. She only knew her arm ached, and the wedding was 7 weeks away, and she was so very tired. If you were in Hana's place, caught between your pride and your child's next meal, what would you have done? I want you to sit with that for a moment, because it is not an easy question, and anyone who tells you it is has never had to choose. There was one person in that house who saw everything, and her name was Dorothy. Dorothy was 68 years old and had kept house for wealthy families for the better part of 40 years, including, once upon a time, for Ethan's own late mother. She had a way of moving through a room without disturbing the air, and a pair of eyes that missed nothing. She had watched Camille arrive 2 years ago, and she had known, in the way that only a woman who has spent a lifetime in other people's houses can know, exactly what kind of woman had walked through the door. The rest of the staff had noticed the change too. Carlos, the cook, kept his head down and his opinions in the kitchen. Pete, who tended the grounds, said nothing at all, because Camille had made it quietly clear that anyone who caused her trouble would find their trouble returned tenfold, in the form of a pink slip. So they whispered among themselves and said nothing to the man who signed their checks. But Dorothy could not stay silent forever. One afternoon she drew Hana aside in the laundry room, her hands folding towels out of 40 years of habit. "Honey," she said softly, "you need to be careful in this house." "I know," Hana whispered. "No, I don't think you do." Dorothy set the towel down and looked at her, and her eyes were kind, but they did not blink. "I have worked in grand houses since before you were born. I have seen women like her more times than I can count. They are all sugar in front of the man they want, and they turn to something else the moment he's out the door. I have watched good people broken by them. I don't want to watch it happen to you." "I don't have anywhere else to go, Dorothy." Hana's voice cracked on the last word. "I have a little girl. I need this." Dorothy reached out and squeezed her hand, and her grip was surprisingly strong. "Then be careful. And Hana, write things down. Dates. What was said. What happened. Keep it somewhere she'll never look. You may never need it." She paused. "But if you do, you will be glad you have it." Hana took the advice to heart. That night she began a small notebook, kept at the bottom of her canvas bag beneath her lunch, and in it she wrote, in her careful hand, the dates and the words and the small cruelties of that house. She wrote quietly, at the kitchen table, after Mia had gone to sleep, and more than once, her pen hovered over the page, and she wondered whether she was being foolish, whether she was writing down evidence of something no one would ever believe, against a woman like Camille Wren, who, after all, would take the word of a housekeeper over the word of the future Mrs. Cole. The powerful had their own kind of gravity. The world tended to bend toward them. Hana had learned that lesson young, and she had never quite unlearned it. But then she would look across the small room at her sleeping daughter, at the little chest rising and falling, at the inhaler on the nightstand, and she would press her pen back to the page and keep writing. Because that was the thing about being a mother. You did not get to give up simply because giving up would have been easier. You wrote it down. You kept going. You did the small, quiet, thankless work of protecting someone who could not yet protect herself, and you trusted that someday it would matter. She did not know, as she filled those first careful pages, how soon that plain little notebook would matter. She did not know that everything was about to come apart, and, in coming apart, finally begin to heal. Ethan Cole was, by trade, a man who noticed things. It was how he had built what he built, by seeing the small detail that everyone else walked past. And lately, in his own home, the small details were beginning to trouble him. Hana had grown quiet, not the peaceful quiet of a person at ease, but the careful quiet of a person minding where she stepped. She flinched, just slightly, when Camille entered a room, a flicker, gone almost before it appeared, and little Mia, who used to babble to anyone who would listen, had grown still and watchful whenever the woman in the designer heels walked past, and would press herself against her mother's leg and go silent. Ethan mentioned it once, over lunch, to his oldest friend and business partner, a steady man named Marcus who had known him since the napkin days. "Something feels wrong at home," Ethan admitted, turning his coffee cup in slow circles. "Camille's been different, sharp with the staff, and Hana, the housekeeper, I could swear she's afraid of her. I keep telling myself I'm imagining it." Marcus set down his fork. "Have you asked Camille about it?" "I did. She says I'm working too hard. Says Hana's oversensitive. Says I'm seeing shadows." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said the thing that a true friend says, even when it is not welcome. "Ethan, you are one of the sharpest men I have ever known in a boardroom. But love has a way of fogging even the clearest glass. I'm not telling you what's true. I'm telling you to trust your own eyes. You've never been wrong when you did." Ethan did not answer, but the words followed him home, and they would not leave. He began, without quite deciding to watch. He came home an hour earlier one evening and found the kitchen too quiet, the kind of quiet that arrives after a room has been full of something and someone has cleared it away. He noticed that Carlos, who used to hum while he cooked, no longer hummed. He noticed that Pete, out in the garden, kept his eyes on his work and gave short answers. He noticed that Dorothy, who had known him since he was a young man with more ambition than sense, watched him now with something in her face he could not quite read, something that looked, when he thought about it later, a great deal like a woman waiting for a man to finally see what was in front of him. And he noticed Hana most of all. He noticed the way she said "yes, ma'am" in a voice pressed flat and small. He noticed the way she kept her sleeves down even on warm days. He noticed that the bright, chattering little girl who used to run to him had grown quiet, and that quiet in a child is a language of its own, if only a grown man will trouble himself to learn it. The more he watched, the more the small details refused to add up to the peaceful home he had believed he was coming back to each night, and a cold, uncomfortable suspicion began to take shape in the back of his mind, the kind a man does not want to be right about, and cannot make himself stop turning over. The wedding was 2 weeks away, when everything Camille had kept so carefully hidden finally spilled into the open. It was a Saturday afternoon, and it was, in every way, an ordinary one, which is how these things usually arrive. Ethan had taken the rare day off to go over the final wedding arrangements. Most of the staff had been given the weekend, all but Hana, who had been asked to come in and prepare the formal dining room for the wedding planner's last visit. And where Hana went, Mia went, and so the little girl sat at the edge of the great room with her coloring books and her rabbit, while her mother worked. Camille was already on edge. A phone call from her mother had interrupted her afternoon, and she came sweeping into the dining room looking for somewhere to set down her frustration. She found it in an instant. "This silver isn't even polished properly," she said, holding a fork up to the chandelier light and turning it as if it had personally offended her. "Do you take any pride in this at all, or do you simply not care?" "I'm sorry, ma'am," Hana said quickly, already reaching for the polish. "I'll do it again right now." But Camille was not looking for an apology. Some part of her, wound tight by months of getting away with it, wanted more than an apology. And so, in front of the child, in front of the long polished table set for a wedding, she reached for the pitcher of water meant for the planner's visit, and she emptied it over the young mother's head. "Maybe that will wake you up," Camille said, and her voice climbed, and it echoed off the marble and rang down the great hall. "You are nothing. Do you hear me? Nothing." Hana gasped and sank to her knees, the water streaming down her face, her uniform soaked through. her hands pressed to the floor. She did not cry out. She did not raise a hand or a voice in her own defense. Years of swallowing her own dignity had taught her only to bow her head and wait for the storm to pass, the way she always had. But Mia did not know how to wait. The little girl was up on her feet in an instant, her coloring book scattering, tears already running down her face, and she ran to her mother crying, "Mommy, Mommy," her small voice cracking with a fear far too big for so small a person. And at that exact moment, the front door opened. Ethan Cole, who had stepped outside to take a call in the garden, walked back into his own home, and he stopped where he stood, as though he had walked into glass. He saw his fiancée standing over a kneeling woman, an empty pitcher still tilted in her hand. He saw water dripping from the edge of the great dining table onto the marble floor. He saw Hana on her knees, soaked and shaking, reaching for her crying child even now, even in that moment, trying to comfort her daughter before herself. And he saw the fear in her eyes, a fear that no clumsy accident with a cart had ever put there. For a long moment, no one moved. The silence in that grand room was the loudest thing Ethan had ever heard. "Camille," he said at last. His voice came out low and slow and utterly unlike itself, a voice none of them had heard from him before. "What is happening in this house?" Camille's face changed in the space of a breath. The fury vanished and something practiced and pleasant slid into its place. "Ethan, thank goodness. She ruined the silver for the planner, and I got frustrated, that's all. The pitcher it was an accident. It slipped. She's mean to Mommy." The small voice came from below. Mia had let go of her mother and crossed the room, and now she wrapped both arms around Ethan's leg and looked up at him, her little face streaked with tears. "She's mean to Mommy every day," the child said. "Mommy says sorry, 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 all the time, and she said Mommy is like a chair." The words came out broken and simple, one after another, in the plain way that only a child can speak, and each one landed on that room like a stone dropped into still water. Ethan lowered himself down until he was eye to eye with the girl. His hands were not quite steady as he held her small shoulders. "Mia," he said gently, "sweetheart, can you tell me what you mean?" Mia nodded hard, and she lifted one small finger and pointed it straight at Camille. "She yells at Mommy. She said bad words, and she made Mommy's arm hurt. That's the owie. I saw it." Ethan went pale, and then the color came back into his face all at once, a heat rising up his neck, a controlled, terrible anger that Camille had never once seen in the 2 years she had known him. He rose slowly to his feet and turned to face her. "Is it true?" "Ethan, she's a baby." Camille tried to laugh, and the laugh came out thin. "She doesn't understand what she's—" "Don't." The single word cut across the room like a blade. "Don't you dare tell me what a 4-year-old does and does not understand. Children do not invent things like this. They don't make up she made Mommy's arm hurt out of thin air. They say it because they watched it happen." He turned away from her, and he crossed the room to where Hana still knelt on the wet floor, and he crouched down beside her and took a clean towel from the sideboard and wrapped it, gently, around her shoulders. "Hana," he said, and his voice had changed again, all the hardness gone, only something raw left behind. "I am so sorry. I didn't know. I swear to you, I didn't know. Are you all right?" Hana could not find words. She could only nod, while the tears on her face mixed with the water still dripping from her hair. Camille's eyes went from Ethan to Hana and back again, and for the first time, the mask cracked all the way through, and what showed underneath was not remorse. It was fear, the fear of a person who feels the ground shifting and cannot find her footing. "Ethan, please, let me explain," she said, and the anger was gone from her voice now, replaced by something pleading. "This isn't what it looks like. I've just been so stressed with the wedding, and she's clumsy. She's always breaking things and—" "Stop." Ethan did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He rose and turned to the young mother. "Hana, would you roll up your sleeve for me, please?" Hana hesitated. Her eyes went to Camille, and the old fear rose up in her, the fear that had kept her silent for the better part of a year. But when she looked back at Ethan, his eyes were steady and kind, and something in them told her that this time, The silence was over. Slowly, she drew back her sleeve. There, along her forearm, were the marks, faded now to yellow and green, the marks of weeks before that had never fully healed before new ones had begun to appear. Not the kind of thing a cart leaves behind, the kind of thing a hand leaves behind. Ethan's jaw tightened. He had seen those marks once before, weeks ago, and he had accepted the excuse, and he had let it go, because letting it go had been easier than facing what it meant. The knowledge of his own blindness settled onto him now like a weight. "How long?" he asked quietly. "Hana, how long has this been happening?" And Hana, given permission at last to speak a truth she had carried alone, drew a long and shaking breath. "Since almost the beginning, Mr. Cole." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I needed the work. I have a little girl. I have nowhere else to go, and I couldn't lose the paycheck. So I never said a word. I told myself I could get through it. I'm sorry. I should have told you." "No." Ethan shook his head slowly. "You were surviving. You were protecting your daughter. That is not weakness, Hana. That is the strongest thing a mother can do." He looked at her, and there was steel in it now. A promise being made. "You will never have to survive that in this house again." Camille felt the last of her control slipping away, and she reached for the only card she had left. "Ethan," she said, "you are really going to take the word of a housekeeper over mine? Over the woman you are about to marry?" Ethan turned to her, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet, and it was final. "I am going to take the word of a child who told the truth when every adult in this house was too afraid to. I am going to take the word of the marks on an innocent woman's arm, and most of all, Camille, I am going to take the word of my own 2 eyes, because I just watched you stand over someone on her knees, and I will not spend one more day pretending I didn't." In the days that followed, Ethan did something Camille had never once imagined he would do. He pulled the security footage. The house, like most of its size, had cameras throughout the common rooms, a matter of ordinary safety that Camille had always dismissed as needless worry on Ethan's part. She had walked past those small dark lenses 1,000 times without a second thought, because it had never occurred to her that anyone would ever have reason to look. Now that very system became the thing that undid her. Ethan sat alone in his study late into the night, a single lamp burning, and he watched. He watched weeks of quiet cruelty play out in silence on the screen, the sharp words over nothing, the meals canceled during long shifts, the mockery of Hana's voice when Camille believed no one important was listening. He watched. 3 weeks back, the moment his fiancée had taken hold of the young mother's arm, hard enough to leave the marks he had asked about, and been lied to about. But the footage that struck him hardest was older still. 2 months back, the camera in the living room had caught a video call between Camille and her own mother, recorded by accident while Hana dusted quietly in the background. Furniture, as far as Camille was concerned, and therefore nothing to lower her voice for. And so, in her own words, in her own voice, Camille had laid out exactly what she was. "Once I'm Mrs. Cole," she said on the recording, easy and certain, "I'll have access to accounts his own lawyers can't touch. My attorney found the loopholes in the prenup. Give it 18 months and I renegotiate all of it. He's naive, Mother. Successful, but naive. He actually believes I love him for himself." Ethan's hands closed slowly around the edge of his desk. Every gentle moment of the last 2 years replayed itself in his mind, and one by one they turned to ash. Every soft word, every tender look, revealed now for the performance it had always been. The dinner where she had wept over a sad film, and he had thought her tender-hearted. The morning she had brought coffee to the staff, and he had thought her kind. He had believed he was marrying a warm woman with a good heart. He had been marrying a role, played flawlessly, for an audience of one. And he thought of his mother, who had raised him at a kitchen table, to believe that a person's true measure is how they treat those who can do nothing for them. He thought of how she used to say that you could learn everything you needed to know about a person by watching them speak to a waiter or a clerk, or anyone the world had decided did not matter. He had forgotten that lesson somewhere along the way, somewhere between the napkin and the mansion, between the struggle and the success. And it had nearly cost him everything that mattered, under his own roof, while he looked the other way. He thought, too, of a young mother who had knelt on his floor and swallowed her own dignity for the better part of a year, rather than risk the roof over her daughter's head. And he felt something he had not felt in a long time. Not anger now, but shame. The clean, clarifying shame of a good man who has seen his own blindness plainly and has decided he will not be blind again. He sat with that for a long time, and then he closed the laptop and he made his decisions. The next morning, Ethan asked Hana to come and see him in his study. She arrived nervous, unsure what she had done, the old dread still clinging to her. Mia waited just outside the door with Dorothy, who had appointed herself the little girl's guardian and dared anyone to say otherwise. "Hana," Ethan said gently, gesturing to the chair across from him. "Please, sit. First, I owe you an apology." Hana blinked. In all her years of service, no one in his position had ever said such a thing to her. "I should have seen this sooner," he went on. "I should have asked more questions the day I saw that mark on your arm. Instead, I let my own comfort, my own trust in someone I believed I loved, blind me to what was happening under my own roof, to a person who kept my home running. That is my failure, Hana, and I am sorry for it." "Mr. Cole," Hana managed, entirely unused to such words being spoken to her. "You don't owe me anything. I should have spoken up." "No," he said firmly. "You did what you had to do to keep your daughter safe and fed. There is no shame in that. The shame belongs to the person who did the harm, and to me for not paying closer attention." He leaned forward. "So I'm not going to give you an apology and nothing else. Words are cheap. Let me tell you what I intend to do." And he did. The engagement, he told her, was already over. That was not in question. But beyond that, he meant to see that Hana and her daughter would never again be one paycheck away from the street. He would cover every cost of Mia's asthma care, for as long as she needed it. He would raise Hana's wages to what the work had always been worth. And this was the part that undid her entirely. He offered to pay for her to go back to school, to finish the education she had set down years ago when Mia came into the world. "You don't have to do all of that," Hana said, her voice breaking. "It's too much." "I want to," Ethan said simply. "Your daughter told the truth when every grown adult around her chose silence. That kind of courage, at 4 years old, should be rewarded, not punished by circumstance. I've spent my whole life being told what money can buy. I would like, just once, to spend some of it on something that actually matters." Outside the door, a small voice asked Dorothy why Mommy was crying, and Dorothy, wiping her own eyes, said, "Those are the good kind of tears, sweetheart. Those are the good kind." Word of what had happened began to move through Ethan's circle, the way word always does among people who have too much time and too little to talk about. Camille, desperate to save what was left of her name, went first. She called mutual friends and spun her own version of events, that Hana had invented the marks, that the child had been coached, that Ethan was breaking down under the strain of work and had turned on the woman who loved him. But the footage did not lie, and when Ethan's attorney reviewed the recorded call about the prenup, Camille, in her own voice, laying out her plan to strip the man she claimed to love, whatever doubt remained in that room simply evaporated. Camille was offered a way out. She could leave quietly, with a modest settlement and a mutual agreement of silence, and go on with her life. It was more mercy than she had shown anyone in that house. She refused. Instead, she threatened to take her own twisted story to the press first, to damage Ethan's name before he could damage hers. It was the last mistake she would make in that city. Through his legal team, Ethan released the footage to a handful of trusted journalists, not out of revenge, he was careful to say, but out of responsibility. "If she would do this to someone in my own home," he told his lawyer quietly, "imagine what she would do with real money and real power behind her. People deserve to know who they're dealing with, before she finds the next one." Within 48 hours, the footage had traveled well beyond that quiet hillside. The recording of a woman standing over a kneeling mother, paired with her own voice describing exactly why she had agreed to marry a man she did not love, moved across the country. And what had begun as a private matter in a single stone house became something larger. A conversation, at kitchen tables and over back fences, about wealth and entitlement, and the quiet, invisible dignity of the people who clean the homes of the powerful, and are so rarely seen at all. If you had been in Camille's place, watching a life you built on a lie come apart because of choices you were sure no one would ever witness, what would have gone through your mind? Some endings bring closure. This one brought something harder, a reckoning. The fall was swift. Camille's own family, embarrassed by the attention, put out a careful statement claiming they had known nothing of her conduct. This despite the recording that clearly featured her mother on the other end of the line. Her friends, one by one, grew quietly unavailable. The wedding, of course, was called off for good. Within the month, Camille left the city altogether and returned to the family home she had come from, her name tarnished in the very circles she had once ruled. Reports drifted back, months later, that she had moved overseas to start again, somewhere her name meant nothing yet. Whether she ever sat with what she had done, no one could say, but the cost of her choices was hers to carry now, and it followed her. Ethan, to his own surprise, found himself the object not of scandal but of quiet admiration, not because he had sought it, but because of how he had answered the moment. When he spoke to reporters, he did not dwell on Camille at all. He turned the conversation, again and again, to the thing he felt actually mattered. "I had cameras," he said in one interview, "that traveled far and wide. I had resources. I had every advantage a person could have. And it still took the honesty of a 4-year-old to open my eyes to something happening right in front of me. I think that should tell all of us something, about how easily we choose comfort over truth, even when the truth is standing right there, waiting for us to look." And Hana's life turned, slowly and then surely, toward the light. With Ethan's support, she enrolled in evening classes at the community college, working toward a degree in early childhood education, a dream she had quietly folded up and put away years before, when a positive test and a hard road had made dreams seem like something for other people. Ethan kept her hours flexible enough to study, and he checked in on her often, not as an employer keeping tabs, but as a man who had come to genuinely care what became of her. A year later, she finished her associate's degree. With that in hand and a glowing letter of recommendation, she took a position as a teaching assistant at a preschool not far from her apartment. Steady work, honest work with dignity in it, and a future she could finally build without looking over her shoulder. And Mia, little Mia, freed at last from the cold that had settled over that house for so many months, became once again the bright, curious, chattering child she had always been meant to be. She still visited the estate now and then, no longer the daughter of the help, but a small friend of the house. And Ethan made a point, every week, of setting aside time to sit on the floor and read with her. "You know you're a very brave girl," he told her one afternoon, while she colored beside him. Mia looked up, puzzled but pleased. "Brave like a superhero?" Ethan smiled and reached over and ruffled her hair. "Exactly like a superhero. You told the truth when it was hard to tell. That's the bravest thing there is." Ethan took his time before he opened his heart again. He spent it, instead, rebuilding his trust in his own judgment, and reflecting on how a smart man had come so close to a foolish thing. When he did eventually meet someone new, a pediatric nurse named Emily, introduced to him through a children's charity he now quietly supported, he watched her the way he had learned to watch, not for how she treated him. Any person can be charming to the one they hope to win. He watched, instead, for how she treated the people who could do nothing for her at all, the waiter, the coat check, the tired young mother at the next table, and what he saw there, over many months, was enough. That, he had learned, is where a person's truth is written. As for Hana, she often thought back to that terrible afternoon in the dining room, the cold water, the shame, the fear that had hung over so much of her time in that house. But she thought, far more often, about what came after, about the small voice of her daughter, cutting through months of silence, about the unexpected decency of a man who chose to face an uncomfortable truth instead of turning away from it. Years later, when Mia was old enough to understand the whole of the story, Hana told it to her, sitting on the edge of the bed the way she had 1,000 nights before. "Sometimes," she said, brushing the hair back from her daughter's face, The people with the least power in the room are the ones with the most important thing to say. Don't you ever be afraid to speak the truth, my love, even when your voice shakes. Especially when it shakes. Mia was quiet for a while, thinking it over in the serious way she had. Then she asked the question children always eventually ask about the hard chapters of their parents' lives. Were you scared, Mama, in that house? Hana considered the question honestly, because her daughter had earned an honest answer. Every single day, she said. I was scared of losing the job. I was scared of what would happen to us if I did. I was scared that if I spoke up, no one would believe me, and I would lose everything and change nothing. She smiled, and there was a whole life in that smile. But do you know what I learned? Fear and courage are not opposites. Courage is not the absence of being scared. Courage is being scared clear through, and doing the right thing anyway. You did that when you were 4 years old, and you didn't even know that's what it was called. You just knew your mama needed help, and you told the truth. And Mia, older now, understood. She grew up to be the kind of person who noticed the quiet ones at the edges of rooms, the tired, the overlooked, the ones the world had decided not to see. She could not have told you exactly why, but somewhere deep down, beneath memory, she had always known that the smallest voice in a room is sometimes the only one telling the truth. And she had always known, too, that it costs a person nothing to stop and listen, and can cost everything not to. The lesson of this story is a simple one, but it is worth carrying with you. Kindness and cruelty cannot hide forever, not behind money, not behind status, not behind the finest silk or the highest gate. The truth has a patience all its own. It waits. And sooner or later, most often when we least expect it, it finds its way out into the light. And it very often comes through the smallest, plainest voice in the room, the one no one thought to listen to, the one with nothing to gain and no reason to lie. A child, a servant, a stranger. The person the powerful had decided was only furniture. So the next time you find yourself in a room where something is wrong and everyone has agreed to say nothing, remember a 4-year-old girl who pointed one small finger and changed 4 lives with the truth. And remember that the bravest voice in any room very rarely belongs to the loudest person in it. More often, it belongs to the smallest. Friends, if this story touched your heart tonight, take a moment to let me know. Give it a like so more people can find it. Subscribe if you'd like to sit with me for the next one. And share it with someone who needs to hear it right now. Someone who has been made to feel like furniture and needs reminding that they never were. And tell me, in the comments below, what moved you most? Was it little Mia's courage? Was it Hana's quiet strength through it all? Or was it the moment a powerful man chose the hard truth over an easy comfort? Let me know, and don't forget to tell me which state or which country you're watching from tonight. Until the next story, take care of one another, and keep listening to the small voices. You never know which one is telling you the truth.